of income inequality. One of the main reasons for the gender wage gap is that most women work in lower wage occupations and lower paid industries. A fact sheet produced by this government states that women represent 100% of those employed in 6 of the 10 lowest paying occupations in the province. I'll table that. Women over 65 are more likely to live in poverty and less likely to have access to employment-related pensions, and I'll table that. So my question for the Premier is, if the Premier truly wants to make sure that every Nova Scotian is looked after, not just the select few, does he find it acceptable that women working in Nova Scotia in 2016 are still living in poverty?
The Honourable Premier.
Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question. I think it's no Nova Scotian wants to see any Nova Scotian, Mr. Speaker, living in poverty. We recognize the issues she's brought to the floor of the House of Assembly, Mr. Speaker. It's why every decision that our government makes, Mr. Speaker, does so through a feminine lens, quite frankly. As a child raised by a single parent, Mr. Speaker, I know well what it's like to be in one of those households. I want to tell the honourable member, shortly after becoming government, I took to the national level the issue around maintenance and enforcement. In my view, it's unacceptable. If 2 adults have differences, that's their business, but you have a responsibility to care for your children, and it's our government's mission to ensure that those are responsible to raise their children, they will. Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud of the fact I've appointed more women to the Executive Council than ever in our history. I'm very proud of the fact, Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud of the fact, Mr. Speaker, that the Deputy Minister level, Mr. Speaker, the gender balance is 50-50, Mr. Speaker. Very proud of the fact when I have an opportunity to appoint people to the bench, I've appointed more women to the bench, Mr. Speaker, than that government did in 4 years. I did, Mr. Speaker, in a very short period of time. We're going to continue to make sure, Mr. Speaker, that the gender balance and gender equality continues to remain the focus of this government. Do we have work to do? Of course we do. But, Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to work with those Nova Scotians that recognize this government is looking forward and not looking back at the years that the mess they left us in.
The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I commend anybody for putting women in any positions of authority, and I commend the Premier for that. However, I am talking about poverty in Nova Scotia and how we're going to deal with that issue. A recent report on the gender wage gap in the retail sector found that even when working in the same types of jobs, men are paid more than women, and when full-time positions become available, they're more likely to be given to men. Low wages contribute to the gender wage gap and income inequality, and this is both an important social issue and an economic challenge. The McKinsey Global Institute calculates that $12 trillion could be added to global GDP by 2025 if steps were taken to advance women's economic equality. So could the Premier please explain what this government is actually doing to address the gender wage gap? Thank you.
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, again, I want to thank the honourable member for the question. Not only, Mr. Speaker, have we made the investments and appointments that I referred to earlier, we're continuing to drive and work with our private sector partners to drive growth opportunities. We're very encouraged by the fact we led the country in retaining young people in this province, Mr. Speaker. We're very encouraged on the population growth that's taking place. We're encouraged by the excitement we're seeing in the private sector to create opportunities for our citizens. We're also, I want to remind the honourable member that we're very encouraged by the fact when we look across our professional service, many of our daughters, Mr. Speaker, are not only making up 50% of those classes, Mr. Speaker, they're making up more than 50% in some of the professions across our government services, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to lead by example. We're going to continue to stand beside our daughters, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that they recognize that they have the same equal opportunity and the same opportunities in this province as their brothers do.